So welcome everyone. I know there's a couple of people that may join late. It's very exciting since those of you, I think almost everybody that knows me, I talk about that I'm bi-coastal for American Cancer Society. I learned, started volunteering in San Diego, learned a lot from Chris Thomas and the whole committee in New England, then brought that whole concept back to San Diego, then moved back to New England. So I love this concept from coast to coast that we can be here today because I know that both coasts and everyone in between really is very interested in what we're doing. So first, just welcome. Thank you for joining, and I hope that you're going to enjoy hearing some more information. So we are very excited to have people here tonight. I initially, for some of you know, I was trying to form something in person on the West Coast, but I felt it was so timely that when we couldn't execute that plan, I talked with the staff partners and we just said, we really need the opportunity with everything that's happening in funds and what's going on. We felt it was so important to be able to have a chat about it, and it's certainly a lot easier to have the experts come in front of you. So I prefer being in person, but I'm so grateful for tonight. So thank you very much for everyone. We're honored to have Dr. William Dahut, and he's American Cancer Society's Chief Scientific Officer. Some of you have had the opportunity to meet him. And also, when I've had the opportunity to hear from the Cancer Society's leadership that really delves so deeply about what's happening nationally, I feel so privileged about that, but I realize I can't do justice to delivering that information back to the group. So you folks are going to get to see live on video and hear from Dr. Dahut, and we're recording so that we can share that because I think the messages are vital. And I recognize that I'm very fortunate to have that frequent opportunity to hear from the leadership, and that you guys have invested so much of your passion and your finances that it's important you would hear also. Before we jump in, we are going to have an opportunity for Q&A, but Dr. Dahut's going to help us be able to, we're intentionally leaving time for your questions because you always have really good questions. So we're going to take advantage of doing that and hearing why now is such an important time while we double down on our resources and seeing what we can do to make a difference in what's happening with the American Cancer Society and research. While we're talking, please keep in mind how you might think you're uniquely positioned to be able to make a difference in this arena as we delve in. Everybody here has already made such a significant contribution of intention. Not everybody, like when I fundraise for Making Strides Against Breast Cancer, I might have hundreds of donors, but you guys invest your time and your energy and understanding. And Mark, on the board, David, you've been both national board leadership. This is, you all spend so much energy that it's really important to be able to make sure that your questions get answered. So that's a key reason why we're here. Let's see. So Dr. Dahut, how about if we start with a question that, can you share with the group the current landscape of cancer research funding, because they only know what they're hearing in the news, and I'd love to have them hear from you.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank you, Stacy, and particularly the San Diego group as well as the New England group for really the commitment to research. Obviously, I care passionately about it, and research is not always something that resonates with people. They know often about things like the Hope Lodge or driving people to chemo appointments, but the research, which is sort of oftentimes a long-term endeavor, were things that folks like you guys invested in maybe 5, 10, maybe 20 years ago, eventually has, real impact in patients. So I really want to thank the folks on the call for really your passion, your time, and your treasure. So I want to start with that. touching on what's going on now, and Mark's on the call, obviously, so he has a sense of what's going on at Harvard, but this is like, nothing that we've ever seen before. And what makes it so sad is that it's really a time when we're seeing, such tremendous advances in understanding cancer and coming up with cancer therapeutics. Just thinking about even where we were, 20 or 25 years ago when we were sort of first time we really had some, targeted therapy for lung cancer and the number of drugs for lung cancer, the fact we now know how the immune system can treat cancers, we're really on the verge of really even incredible additional advancements. And we know that things are, we're not going to snap our fingers and things will sort of magically go back to where they were. So I think one thing that we're thinking about is how we can ensure that we are funding the most impactful science, the science that really will make a major difference in the lives of patients, survivors, and their families. So we're sort of looking at that because when you see such turmoil, I think it's important to reflect. But what we're fearful of is what this will have on how this will impact really the future generations. Because so much of the innovative work is done by young people, by young scientists, folks who look at things in a different way and can think beyond the status quo. And if people think there's not a future, if the people, who don't even delve to go into this, it's really, really concerning. You know, hard to know what to believe in the press, but there were reports in the Washington Post, and I have heard some similar numbers recently, 30, 40% cuts in the NIH budget. Already, we know NCI was only funding, maybe 10 or 12% of grants at first period. Anyway, so and this is going to impact, major ways, major factors across the cancer continuum. ACS, can't fill the gap. We're not going away. We're going to certainly make sure we can do everything we can to have our science most impactful. But people are reaching out to us. The scientists are, the young scientists, pharma and biotech folks, to, advocate for cancer research, but to ensure that, we are there ensuring that they're, we'll working to really end cancer as we know it for everyone. So, um, it's an important time. It's in a time that I think we really need to step up a little bit, even more so in this field. But happy to answer any particular questions as before I ramble on for the full hour here. So,
No, and certainly both, something that I'd like you to touch on that both groups have asked, and thank you to all the staff leadership here, to Mike and Chris and Esther, again, coast to coast,
sure.
and Shana and Maria, and then
Esther
some of
knows a
our.
good Jewish deli in Palm Desert, California, if you're ever there, by the way. She took me there 2 nights ago or whatever it was. So, right. So,
So both the New England group started as a PAYIF group, and that was the concept that we took over on the West Coast. And I know both groups, we're understanding
yeah,
there's a change, but can you describe,
yeah,
can you
no,
help address that?
it's a great question. So I think it's important to know that the American Cancer Society made a major commitment to research over the past several years. And the current research budget is $30 million a year more than the highest point ever in the history of ACS even prior to the pandemic, because then after the pandemic, things fell, which means over the last several years, 3 or 4 years, that's about $100 million more we've put for research. And so the advantage to the scientists is that they can find out much earlier on if their grants have been funded, if we plan on giving those dollars out earlier on. And we can then also prioritize in a way where we want the dollars to go. But what that means is that it puts a real burden on the Marias and the Shanas and the Blythes that now they have to raise an additional $30 million every year targeted just for research. And so by putting the additional dollars on, on our backs of the development people, that meant that every dollar that is raised by research councils, we need to pay those $30 million. And so, and strategically, it's much better to be able to tell somebody earlier on that they have the grant. It's much better for us to kind of strategize. And to be honest, for the research councils, now, you have a wide breadth of grants that we'd love to have you support. $130 million a year of really the finest science. And our grantees love being engaged with people to help support their work. And so because of this, if the group wants to work on breast cancer, there's $25 million worth of grants to look at. If for rare cancers, I think that gives you a much greater variety of grants to choose and to support. And of course, the $30 million is more than we wound up bringing in the payF dollars over time. So we've actually increased significantly over time. Obviously, we'd love that number to go up more. We'd love to go up to 30, 40, 50 million, over past. We'd love to get to, $1 billion in grants out. We have about $530 million out in grants now. So that's how it, is really to help with the development people since they're raising so many dollars for the grant dollars. And then if the payFs were sort of on top of that, they would not be able to actually find dollars to fund the things we came up with. So it is sort of that's the behind the scenes look. And I'm happy to sort of go into more details, but that's how we kind of got there.
Well, I was just going to ask if conceptually, I think what kind of was described to me is part of the understanding is if we don't raise money, they're all payouts anyway. So if we
Yeah.
raise the money and we're committing in advance to raise the money, we can still attach our backing, our dollars to the
Oh
grant that
yeah.
we'd like to feel proud of with that researcher, but they might not have gotten funded. So in a way, the fact
No,
that
if we don't, if they don't, if Blythe and Maria don't raise over $2 million every single day of the year, then the following year, then we'll give out less in grant dollars. During
right.
COVID, we, Mark's on the call. I don't know if we gave anything out, or certainly we gave out very little dollars in grant dollars. So if dollars don't come in, we can't put anything out. So you're right. All of ACS at the end of the day is one big pay if. It just depends a little bit about when you actually tell the people when they got the money. So.
Great, thank you. And helping us understand the gaps as well. If we did raise unlimited funds, what issues would we address as
Yeah, so I thought it might be good for you guys to hear a little bit, how I think about our priorities a little bit, and then maybe that you can talk about, where some of the areas where the dollars can go because there are obviously lots of gaps. So one priority is really to, detect trends and patterns in cancer populations which really gives us insight to the critical areas where cancer research is needed. So that's really all the work that Ahmadine Jamal's team does and Becky Siegel, where they come up with really interpretations that areas we're seeing, greater risk of cancer in young folks, for the first time ever, more lung cancer in women than men under 65, women cancers increasing under 50 faster than men. So we are driving this data. And so obviously more dollars to study these trends and patterns because they're really fueling what's going on for really the nation. I mean, you'll hear the nation talk about work that our team is doing based on their years and years of research. So that's one area. The second area is really discovery of new biomarkers and therapies from the scientific perspective. So basic science work, because we need to find more ways to detect cancer scientifically and then find ways to develop new therapies to attack it. So this is science that may take a period of time. For example, there's something called the dark genome out there now, which sounds like something from Star Wars. And I'm sure everyone remembers, but basically, you have DNA, which basically has all your important genetic information. DNA sort of splits apart. You develop RNA. RNA, remember the messenger RNA, vaccines, and they send a message to develop amino acids, which makes proteins. And so when we think about cancer, we used to think about having a mutation in the DNA, make an abnormal protein. But we've now discovered that actually we're seeing abnormal amino acids, abnormal proteins with normal DNA and this kind of hidden dark genome. This is basic science work, but this may be very effective targets for immune-based therapy. So this is what I mean. We need to find out new targets for areas that we would never have thought about. The third area is really improving how well patients do who are receiving therapy and how well people are doing post-therapy. So this is, you find a new treatment, a new mechanism in the laboratory, but ultimately, how do you translate that into patients? So we don't actually run our own clinical trials, but we can give support to investigators doing that. We can look at outcomes. We can look at our implementation. Is it getting to patients? And then people who have had cancer, to ensure that afterwards, if they have side effects, if they have mental health issues, make sure they're exercise, because exercise can actually help decrease cancer risk, and make sure they get proper screening afterwards. So I think that's an aspect that we're putting dollars in. We're putting a major effort, because we are the American Cancer Society, about the science behind cancer prevention, cancer early detection, and then looking at how to translate it into patients. So that's something, Mark and others on the board we've discussed about. We think that's really a really important part for cancer research. We think if we really want to decrease the burden of cancer, people really, being diagnosed, having toxicities and dying from the disease, preventing it and finding it earlier, and then how to really integrate that into the system. So that'll need our help. That'll need Lisa Lacoste and advocacy and patient support. So really studying the science, is it AI-based screening technologies? Is it ways you can basically get a screen test without going to your doctor? Is it a blood test? How does it get paid for? Do you have, dense breast? Can you get an MRI when you're 30? So, and who should get that? So that's really an area. And then finally, really supporting the next generation of scientists. We have some programs for women and high school students. We're going to expand that to men, college interns, and then we're really excited about our post-baccalaureate fellows. These are people that have already done a little bit of science undergrad. They spend 2 years then doing cancer research, and usually at a cancer center in cohorts of 4. We're also looking at people from groups that aren't always represented, people from rural areas, from racial minority groups, and then giving them the opportunity. And, for some of them, the light bulb goes on and they're going to make the next big discovery. So with more resources, those are the areas. And I think, things we can think about is, how can we screen for non-smokers and lung cancer? How do we do better testing for women who are at higher risk for breast cancer? Are there tests for other type of cancers like anal cancer and esophageal cancer that we should be having in our guidelines? How do we get more fellows to be trained? I mean, how do we determine the interaction between cancer funding changes and outcomes on patients? So we got a lot of work to do. And that's why we're so happy to engage with folks like yourself. So
And can you speak just a little bit? I know some of the people on this call may be really familiar, but the fact that part of the focus is changing the future of cancer for everyone, and that the fact of what that means across the board, and like programs like the Voices,
yeah,
like if
no,
you could just, some
sure.
people won't know about that.
Yeah, so I think it's important. So a couple things people say, what does it mean to end cancer as we know it? Why can't we just end cancer? And of course, that would be better. But we really know that sort of the science, the biology of cancer is probably something we can't eliminate, because it's probably a combination of exposure to external toxins, the genes you're born with, and mutations that are naturally occurring in your body. But if we can change cancer where it's no longer, the most horrific word in the human language, at least ones you can say on TV anyway, that the that the to where it's something that people have a diagnosis and they deal with it and they move on, that would be great. But we know that right now, not everybody does equally well with their cancer treatment and their cancer access and their survival. So for everyone, we want to ensure that people are at high risk, who are in areas they don't have the same access, whether you're in rural areas or areas that don't have the same kind of health care, do as well as everyone else. And that's like some of our programs. like Voices, which is a large cohort study, which we hope to enroll 100,000 Black women, follow them starting from age 25 on, depending when they enroll, through and beyond a cancer diagnosis. This is a group that's one of the highest risk groups, of any. And if you look at breast cancer, stage for stage, grade for grade, the women are more likely to die from their disease. And even when they're in equivalent socioeconomic areas or groups. So it's not simply a zip code based factor. So what are those factors going on in that? It's incredibly important to study high risk groups like this. And then those findings will really translate to others too.
Thank you. And before I open it up to questions, again, another area for sure, New England, folks are very familiar with Hope Lodge, but can you give a little snippet about that for
Well,
those?
we're lucky we have Dr. Goldberg on here because who's a little bit of a Hope Lodge aficionado, but it's you know it's so hard to have cancer. And it's particularly hard to have cancer if you're not at a near a center that has uh, innovative therapies that can make a difference. And if you have to travel for radiation or intensive chemotherapy, and you have to then drive 2 to 3 hours each way, you're either just not going to do it, or you're gonna try to do it and stop. So you need a place to stay. And first of all, the economics of staying in a hotel in Boston are not possible for almost anybody when radiation could be 6 weeks. And then secondly, it's not really fun staying in a hotel after a while. And so being at a Hope Lodge, which is a place where cancer patients and their families can stay for free. There's no means testing. Obviously there's no one's asking to look at your W-2s. And you then build a community around people who understand in some way what you're going through. You have a chance to have meals together. You have a chance to meals not to have together, but there's also a period to relax, get away from the hospital a little bit, be in a place where you have support, where you can, play a game of checkers or chess or, read the same novel 4 times, and live a semi-normal existence as opposed to, heading down the Mass Turnpike for a couple hours, getting sick in traffic, while every day while you're getting your radiation. And some people, it could be, hours and hours away. I know when last time we were in Boston, there was a family there from Ohio was going to Boston because there was a treatment there that was not available anywhere else. And there's, I think, 31 and soon to be 32 Hope Lodges in the country. It's something that, anytime you talk to anybody in any state, or any city, they're like, we need a Hope Lodge. We need a place for our patients to come so they have a humane way to go through their cancer treatment. So it's a lot of things like American Cancer Society. It's for better or for worse, we're an organization that's relatively modest about our achievements. Maybe it's people always like, is that like a Ronald McDonald House? And it's really different. This is because it's for families and adults. And it's something that it's really, probably one of the most important things that we actually do, to be honest with you.
Thank you. And the New England group has the privilege that most of the time when we meet in person, we meet at a Hope Lodge. And
Yeah.
we're just able to be reminded about the concept of the community there. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And um, also, I know I've heard from a lot of the folks that often part of what we feel privileged, honored to participate is so many of us ourselves or loved ones that have had to endure cancer were able to get the resources and to where they needed and everything. And part of that makes us glad to be able to participate. We all have our strong whys that were involved. And to know that part of what we're doing is helping other families to be able to function well and be able to get treatment because everybody has their own stories.
I mean,
So
everybody does. I think that's everybody is touched by cancer. I mean, it might not be a family member, but then it's a close friend or it's a distant relative or it's yourself. It's everybody has been touched by cancer. It's sadly universal at this point. So it's something we need to do much better on.
So I think David may have our first question. David, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments. In my day, we were stuck under $90 million for research. And I'm glad to see you really pushed it and getting it up to 130 and hopefully more. So that's great. One of my questions is, do we still have an intramural program as well as an extramural? And how are those funds separated right now?
Yeah, so we do have an intramural program, actually an incredibly powerful intramural program. So the intramural budget is separate from the extramural budget. Intramural program is set up of a couple different areas. We touched a little bit on our cohorts, particularly the Voices cohort. As you probably know, we've enrolled about 2.5 million folks on cohort studies since the 1950s. We have 2 active cohorts right now. CPS 3 enrolled about 300,000 people. Accrual closed around 2013. Folks are being actively followed. There's been about 15,000 cancer diagnoses in that group, multiple other sub-studies, and then the Voices studies has launched. The second big intramural group is Ahmadine Jamal's, which, you know, basically the flagship of Cancer Facts and Figures, but also deep work. They're looking at studies of the impact of tobacco. A paper came out this week looking at people who vape and also do combustible tobacco. They have the same cancer outcome of people who just smoke cigarettes. So the fact that they do some vaping is not helping them. But a lot of work on tobacco research, a lot of work on economics. That's where our data came out, and in the states that had Medicaid expansion had a much better outcome as far as cancer numbers. So a lot of economic information there. As we build our work on cancer early detection, it's really on the back of Bob Smith. Bob Smith's work is really best known for our cancer guidelines, which we continually do. Our cancer guidelines are often the guidelines that come before some of the other guidelines by other groups. We were the first ones to recommend lowering of the age of colorectal screening based on the information we saw. And we have our journals. So we have 3 journals currently. We'll be planning on launching in 2026 a new journal focused on pediatric cancer and cancer in young adults. So the intramural budget is separate from the extramural grant budget, although sometimes there's collaboration between those funded on grants and our intramural scientists.
So is the intramural over 100? Is it part of the 130 million?
Oh, it's a whole separate budget.
Okay, so perhaps that might be the advertisement for ACS to say that this is also research.
Oh, it's all research, right? Yeah, it's less than the 130. I don't have the exact number in front of me. It's probably around 50 million, I'm guessing offhand, but it's certainly less than the extramural side.
Great. Appreciate your comments about the Hope Lodge. We love it. We think it's great. And
yeah, Dr. Goldberg always tells me it's too small. That's the only problem with it. So
well,
And
the problem is it's always going to be filled, and that's the problem, and that's the good news, and that's the bad news.
right.
well, and Bill David Rosenthal, one of my mentors, and together with Chris Thomas, really did all the heavy lifting to raise the money to build the Boston Hope Lodge.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's on the backs of giants, as they say. All this work is done, so really appreciate it.
Well, and I didn't tell them I was going to put them on the spot because it just coming to me. But Mark and David, would you guys be, as other people are formulating some other questions for Dr. Dahut, would you be willing to share a little bit about yourself and your time with the national board? Because our group, we don't have that experience on the West Coast, the Southern California group, but I also get to meet and be involved with you guys, but to be able to really hear a little bit about the concept of board and your commitment all these years and continuing, it's very impressive.
Well, I can start, Mark, and you can complete. Basically, when I was president in the late 1990s, it wasn't just one voice coming from the American Cancer Society. There were about 50 voices. All the different divisions of the American Cancer Society were doing their thing. And it was only during that late 1990s, early 2000 that we became speaking with one voice and having an incredible information system. The CRS and cancer response system was really the initial part, but now it's the National Cancer Information Service, the 1-800 number, which is an incredible source of information for cancer patients. And it continues to be. So that's the story. I was president in the late 1990s and became a mentor to a number of people, including Mark. So go ahead, Mark.
Thanks.
Hey,
Thank
what
you.
have you done? What have you done since then, Mark?
Well, first of all, Stacy, thank you very much for organizing this. I really appreciate it. For those of you who I haven't met before, I'm Mark Goldberg. I'm a hematologist oncologist in the Boston area, trained at Brigham and Women's and Harvard. And Dr. Rosenthal has been my mentor for many, many decades. I actually first got involved with the American Cancer Society a very long time ago when I was a fellow, when David asked me to participate in a panel that the American Cancer Society was doing. But I became more re-engaged in two ways almost simultaneously. When my sons were in elementary and middle school, an email went out asking for people who they wanted to start a Relay for Life team in the schools. And so and I always get in trouble when I do this, when I said, if you can't find anybody else, I will take it on. And so I ended up leading it.
And you're still, and the problem is you're still doing that, Mark.
Yeah. I still haven't learned. But so I took that on. I went to my first Relay for Life in, I think, 2009. And once you went once, you were hooked. I mean, the luminaria ceremony, the people, the commitment, it was just such a wonderful community event. In parallel with that, right around the same time, David Rosenthal introduced me to the then head of the New England division of the American Cancer Society, and I ultimately joined the New England Division board before we reorganized into a well-integrated national enterprise. And since then, I've served on I chaired the Eastern New England board. I've been on the national board since 2019, and I've was the scientific officer for the past 2 years and had the pleasure of working very closely with Dr. Dahut. And as of April 1st, I'm now the vice chair of the national board for the next 2 years, followed by the chair the following 2 years. So that's my involvement. And you know, the reason I'm so passionate about the American Cancer Society is in large part been discussed today because we're very, very unique. And before I go further, I want to thank Bill for taking the time. One of the real coups of the last several years was stealing Bill from the NCI. Although he might not have a job if he was still.
I have a lot of survivor's guilt right now. I would be honest with you. So,
and Bill shared with you, you know, some of the very important strategic directions that he's taken the American Cancer Society research arm with respect to focusing on those young investigators and not only newly minted oncologists and researchers, but also, as he mentioned, the college students and postbacks and really trying to engage new researchers at a very early stage. Also, although we always hear about the new treatments and, you know, immunotherapies, targeted precision medicine. As Bill pointed out, although it's not as sexy, the best way of surviving cancer is to either never get it or to catch it early. And so focusing our resources, which pale compared to the NCI and the NIH, but they're still incredibly important because we're focusing a large segment of what we do on prevention and early detection, as Bill said. And then what he also pointed out, and what makes us at the American Cancer Society so special and so unique, is that we attack cancer from virtually all angles. So Bill mentioned how we also have an advocacy arm, the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, under the direction of Lisa Lacoste. And Bill and Lisa, I've seen them, they work so well collaboratively. They're joined at the hip. But you know, we also advocate for more research dollars for the NIH and the NCI, and CDC, which is more important than ever right now. So, and then In addition, we have the patient support, the Hope Lodges that many of us know. And by the way, for those of you in California, we recognize that there's a paucity of Hope Lodges west of the Mississippi, and it's a very high priority for us to build some Hope Lodges in California and elsewhere west of the Mississippi. So anyway, I've gone on too long, but thank you all for being here. Stacey, thank you for organizing this. David, thank you for teaching me, and Bill, thank you for all that you do.
No, thank you.
And thank you, gentlemen. Like in our Southern California group, we don't really have this opportunity. So this is, I honestly hadn't thought about that in advance, but to have you guys on to share, because part of what I want the Southern California group to know and to get to be able to experience a little bit is you all, we know we take it so very seriously, but to understand nationally, to be able to hear from Dr. Dahut and to hear from Mark and David, and to see more into the internal concept of what's going on nationally. And as much as I might try to share that, I don't always do that, because it's difficult to do that without the people on board. I also want to thank everyone for their commitment, because I should have started out with that. And if you didn't hear it, thank you, thank you, thank you. You can't hear that enough. So I'm going to say it a few more times tonight.
Stacey?
Farouk, you have a question.
Yes. First of all, Stacey, thank you very much for organizing this thing. This is awesome. I have a question for Dr. Dahut. You mentioned NIH. I guess the question I have is how much ACS relies on federal funding with, what's going on with NIH and CDC. What is the impact to ACS or overall cancer research? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question we got asked a lot. It's not a particularly large part of our budget. It's only somewhere around 10 or $15 million out of our old budget, which obviously is significantly higher. Now, if we lost that money, it would be meaningful for sure, but it's percentage-wise, we're in a better place than a lot of other organizations. Now, we here to stand up for those who need us. And, that could put us into some vulnerable positions. We're going to be thoughtful how we do it, of course. But the direct federal dollars, we don't anticipate great impact. Now, our grantees, our collaborators, and folks like that are having significant problems right now. I mean, I'm sure Mark knows, hearing about things at Harvard. Obviously, there's issues at other universities too. One thing we have discussed is that we do need to come up with ways, perhaps, to think about how we review grants differently, to be more efficient, to make sure that people don't spend time, make sure the peer review panels don't have to go through 40 grants when they're going to fund one, to have investigators spend that time. So, I haven't talked to our team as much in detail about it, but I do think we should bring some people together, some ACS people, some folks on the outside, to think about the whole process, how would be sort of advisory for NIH, and maybe pilot with ACS about sort of the whole grant review process, the peer review process, to make it easier for the applicants, and then basically narrow down more quickly for the peer review panel, so they know the ones that they're funding are actually going to have the most impact. Maybe even have some of the investigators available for questions. So we're talking about, convening a group. At least I'm talking about it. Talking about convening a group to sort of go through some of those things, because we're concerned that federal funding is not going to bounce back for a while, and if any sort of way that we can lead some help on sort of structure to make the greatest use of the dollar so they have the most impact, I think that's something we can sometimes help on. So our convening power, so to speak.
Thank you. Mark, did you have a comment or follow-on question?
Yes, I just two quick things. One is along this may perhaps these same lines about changes in government funding, and there's certain areas that different priorities that the current administration may have compared to past ones. I do want to reassure everyone on this call that, we very purposely have in the vision statement for the American Cancer Society to end cancer as we know it for everyone. And in the mission statement, we also include for everyone. And I can assure you that the commitment of the American Cancer Society to improve access, to improve opportunity to prevent, detect, treat, and survive cancer for everyone remains the highest priority. And everything that we do is viewed through a lens of health equity. That was point number one. Number two, since we have people on this call from California and Massachusetts, we have something in common. And Bill, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe, when we raise money, when we give out our treasure, but we also are often asking others for theirs. People often want to make sure that the dollars they invest are being used locally. And we, both in California and Massachusetts, get an inordinate amount back
Right.
in research
Yeah.
funding because of the great institutions that we have in our two states. So I don't forget that, and it can be a selling point. In fact, when I go when I'm asking for something, for example, if we want support for the Hope Lodge, I go into the head of the Dana-Farber, I go into the head of Harvard Medical School, and I bring with me a list of all of
Oh, yeah.
the millions of dollars in grant support that were currently provided and have previously provided. And with the Hope Lodges, I'll go in with, here's how many people have been staying at the Hope Lodge who are then going to your institution for their care. So all of that kind of helps in our fundraising efforts. So I just mentioned that.
Yeah, no, and I agree. The other thing is that we want to be creative in working with your local organizations. Some of them have statutes that they're required to only fund in the local area. But we find, we're really trying to ways to partner since we have such a vibrant peer review process. I obviously want to tweak it a little bit, but a vibrant peer review process. We have a second review after that. We have a lot of expertise, standing committees. So, if you're involved with a nonprofit that's working in cancer or maybe in health equity in other areas, and particularly if you're funding research and you think you could benefit from working with us, we're happy to talk to them because there's ways we can do things together, co-brand things that we wind up, I think, making it good for everybody. So,
David, did you have a
Yeah.
comment or a question?
It's a comment and a question. One of the biggest things about the federal grants is the elimination of indirect costs. And some institutions have indirect costs up to 50% of the grant. Some have almost 90%. ACS does not include indirect costs. But as I understand it, in many of the grants that are supplied to the American Cancer Society, indirect costs are put into the main part of the project to support the research itself. Am I correct about that?
So we actually give some indirects. So we used to give for our RSGs, which are, like R01 equivalents. When I first came to ACS, we actually gave 20%. And after discussion with our council and with cancer directors, I lowered it to 10%, but then rolled that money back into the grant for the PI. And so, for example, if it was a $100,000 grant, it would cost us 120,000. And now, basically, what happens is we give the PI 110, and it costs us 121,000 because it's 10% more. Some of the cancer centers were not super excited about that, but nevertheless, that seemed, didn't cause as much of a problem as you might expect. So we do give some money, but not nearly what the federal government gives.
David, was the other part of your question, are the institutions, do they sometimes take some of the direct costs out to cover indirects? Do we allow that?
Well, we were afraid of that. When there was some discussion, if we went to zero, that's what would happen. And that's exactly why we didn't do that, because we felt that if you were some institutions couldn't afford to do it. Some institutions just don't have any sort of, endowment money, and some of the more wealthy institutions would just take the money. So this was a way that, we're hoping to thread the needle a bit, but we have not seen that so much where people have taken the dollars out, at least that we're aware of.
Good.
I always have a question, but I want to make sure others have an opportunity before I ask another one.
Were there some in the chat?
I think Blythe and Esther are monitoring those. Well, I'm going to ask my question, and if another one surfaces there. So, of course, mine is always about dollars. So I know that I feel with a number of other of the Southern California group, we've made meaningful multi-year pledges. That's something that we were talked about with staff a couple of years ago. And since I'm always encouraging people to consider and reconsider doing that again, can you describe a little bit why that does make such a difference versus just a decision?
No,
in the
I think a multi-year grant is the best way to fund research because research is a multi-year process. And so just so you guys know, if we award $1 million grant, we don't give the $1 million all in 1 year. We're paying that over the next several years. And I think what's exciting about that when you stay involved over time is because remember, these are grants. This is not a contract. So a scientist tells you this is what he or she wants to do. But oftentimes, somewhere in the middle of the research, they find something that's a little bit different. And the idea of a grant is that we have the trust in the idea that they can pivot to a certain extent. I mean, they're working on breast cancers, can't be working on, polio the next day or something. But I mean, and so having that ongoing commitment over time, the involvement, allows us, first of all, to sort of financially it makes sense because as we're giving out the dollars over time, that's where the money is coming in. But I think that, as our donors, as the folks, our supporters like you guys remain financially involved, it also sort of draws you into sort of relationships with the grantees. And as the grants develop, there's more interesting information, and they may find a new discovery or a new pathway or something that is very different than they initially anticipated. So I think it helps build that bond, and then of course for us for planning purposes, if we're going to give a grant out over 4 years, because we're sort of, as dollars come in 1 year, the dollars are going out the next. It really allows us 2 and 3, 4 years down the line to really plan for that.
Well, and I appreciate that because we've had in Southern California so many over these past 3 years that we've worked so hard. So many of you have committed and recommitted every year. But I know part of what that it is helpful. It's initially awkward for me, even though I was willing to do it myself, to put on paper that I'll do it next year and the year after, right? But at the same time, I understand the opportunity that hey, if the sales pitch is we're trying to save lives, then I guess that's the sales pitch. But the fact of the matter is we're trying to be able to appropriately
Right. And these are pledges. These aren't contracts. I mean, if something catastrophic happened and it was impossible, it's impossible, and we have an incredibly high adherence to people who have given pledges. I mean, I think Brian can tell you we're probably over 95, 98%. But things happen. Things happen in families, medical emergencies, financial turnovers. And if that happens, it happens, So we understand that. That's just life. So I think people always have an anxiety about that, and that's understandable. And we obviously, it should be one's intent that they can make the pledge. But again, if things happen, we certainly understand that this is life.
And for the group in Southern California, like cheers to you guys. I assume you see that you're continuing to be in the room. You're having friends add to join us in the room, which is so awesome. But that shows that you're continuing your commitment. So I know initially when we started, we weren't sure how we were going to walk down that path. But a couple of years ago, we said, let's go after $1 million in the next 3 years. And I'm like, I'm on it. But now I actually want the first, $100,000 donation. I want the first $1 million donation. Like we're looking to be able to, we want to compete with New England in Southern California.
Yeah, well, Tom Brady's gone, so you have a chance
we
now.
want bragging rights. We want bragging rights. So, I really very much appreciate that. And, some of the things that, just being reminded by looking at my notes, right? That we're fighting together so we have a future where terminal cancer doesn't exist. That's what we'd like. Late stage diagnoses decrease, and that life expectancies skyrocket, and that discoveries more from the labs to translate from the labs to people's lives in a rapid pace. Like that's what we're after. That's what we're trying to make happen. And again, like just having you guys on the call, since this is the way we could do it, so grateful. And to be able to be privileged to hear from the leadership, and David and Mark, thank you. That was actually really helpful because we don't have that opportunity in Southern California. I hope that each and every one that's on the call learned something new that makes you continue to accelerate the commitment, the emotion that you feel about what we're doing and how important it is, and the urgency of what we're doing. And
Yeah, I mean, Stacey, you know, we talk about this, but you know, we're still losing over 600,000 people every year. Despite the fact, you know, we're very proud cancer mortality has fallen, you know, by, 34% since the high water mark, 4.5 million cancer deaths averted. You know, losing 600,000 people, 618,000 people anticipated this year. You know, that's 10 packed football stadiums. That's Pittsburgh and Cincinnati together. And everybody knows somebody. So we have to do better. We have to go faster. We have to, and it's going to take young scientists. It's going to take more research. It's going to take people staying at Hope Lodge. It's going to make sure that people get the care. I thank everybody here, you know, taking your time on a late in the afternoon or into the evening, because, you know, this is a bad disease and we have to do better. And that's why I'm, you know.
Well, thank you for your leadership.
Yeah. So.
Thank you for your leadership.
Okay. Well, thank you for all the work.
And we love the collaboration. And my friend that is from she's part of the Southern California group, but she's actually living further up north. So Dawn is on. And so Dawn, I hope you don't mind my saying, so Dawn suffers from MS, but is very committed to the fight against cancer, but often has also been on drugs that were developed for
cancer, right? Yeah.
For cancer.
I mean, probably immunosuppressants and other drugs for sure. Yeah, I was on the review panel with the FDA for MS one time for a chemotherapy drug a long time ago. So I remember having to, they brought in cancer experts to sort of talk about the drugs.
They did. I was on them for 6 years.
Well, thanks for being here tonight.
So
you do. It takes a village, as they say.
Exactly. A lot of villages.
Yeah, really.
Excellent. And those of you that know me so closely, you should all be thanking Esther on and Mike Duff and Chris Thomas put up with me all this time, all the staff. Like I used to say, Stacy's a full-time job, so but they have another full-time job. I'm just
well,
a
that's
small.
why they need a couple of them, Stacy, to be clear.
So thank you guys very much. So, and the rest of you have to take all their calls when they're calling. They're like, oh no, they want to know how big my check's going to be. So really big, really big. Thank you, Maria.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. If you have some random questions you think of afterwards, you know, connect and they'll get it to me or someone will reach out to me. But you know, work through the team, work through Stacy, and happy to help for sure. You know, you guys you are part of our team, so we depend on you for sure.
Thank you all.
Excellent. We'll stay on if some people, shy people, have another question. So, oh, David.
No, that's a thank you.
Oh, it's a thank you. Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Any last minute questions?
We'll make sure to send the recording out as well, and you can feel free to share it.
Excellent. Chris, can you believe you planted this seed back in 2012? It's still going.
I was going to say I feel like a proud parent with the New England, and I'm looking, seeing Farouk and Fiona, and had gone to the receptions. I want to mention one of the greatest receptions I ever went to was the one where they had hot air balloons coming up, as if you remember. And
Wow.
I just want to say to both committees, you know, how critical even you are more than you ever were. When Dr. Dahut talks about 30 million new dollars that we're putting in, we can only do that because we have groups like this that we trust
Right.
going to keep pushing and raising the dollars. And so it's even more important how we're doing it right now. So I want to mention that without having groups like this, and you two are the leaders as far as I'm concerned, we wouldn't have the confidence to do that. And I just want to take, I know everybody's leaving, but we talk about numbers and researches, but the impact that we're having. I was just talking today. I'm very old. I have my 50th college reunion coming up. I was talking to one of my college roommates who had stage 4 melanoma, and it metastasized. He's doing okay. And he said, he went to Mass General and he said, my doctor told me that 4 years ago, I would have died with this. But because of the research and the things that are going on with immunotherapy, he is doing fine. And that's the dollars you all raise. That's the money that comes that you fund additional research. That's the impact. And we've got to remember that. It's dollars and everything, a number, but the fact of the matter is every time you fund another researcher, down the line, somebody's life gets saved. And this is a true story. And, you know, I was proud to say I worked with the American Cancer Society and work with people like you to think about it's those dollars you raised that make a difference. So I think we got to remember that as we
And
go out there
pharma is not going to do that kind of research.
Right.
Pharma will be happy to take findings at a certain point. Biotechs, you know, they're small, they don't have the funds. It's really dependent on the science, and the science for that work for melanoma, you know, like all science, it was a lot of dead ends before it got to where it went to, and eventually led to, you know, somebody winning the Nobel Prize. But it's not something we can just say have pharma take it over. It's just not going to happen, you know.
We need
So
to
that's
do
why
it.
it's so dependent. So
everybody here should be proud of what they've done because that's what we've accomplished.
yeah,
But
he
we got
hopes
a
Chris
lot
is
of work to
friend.
do.
You know,
We got a
so
lot of work.
it's pretty cool. So
It's pretty cool when you think about it, but we got a lot of work. So anyway, thanks, Stacy. It's good to see you too. We haven't talked in a while, and great to see everybody on this call.